The majestic Arctic, a beautiful landscape that dominates the northern pole of our world. The ice fields that cover the Arctic are habitat to a multitude of animals, including the powerful polar bear. However, the ice cap is drastically shrinking every year, resulting in polar bears having to survive on smaller and smaller territory and having to swim farther and farther between widening rifts in the sea ice. It is becoming harder for polar bears to find adequate food supplies. Polar bear conservation has thus become one of the most pressing ecological issues our world is faced with today.
The Arctic is home to many species, each uniquely adapted to survive in the local habitat in correspondence to one another. Because the Arctic is a giant mass of rock and ice and is habitual to freezing temperatures, plants are unable to grow and herbivores have been selected out. As a result, the Arctic serves as a vast hunting ground for carnivores and omnivores, where survival of the fittest is the only law: eat or be eaten. The regional animal kingdom consists of plankton, fish, birds, seals, walruses, polar bears, and whales. These chosen animals, able to withstand and counteract the cold, form a food web by instinct which governs the Arctic. The fish and whales eat plankton, the birds eat fish, the seals eat fish and birds, and the polar bears eat whatever they can get their hands on. Everything in the environment is connected, and each species relies on another one for survival.
The polar bear is an amazing species and is one of the most feared Arctic predators, both in and out of the water. The bear is at the top of the animal food chain, threatened only by humans and their ecological footprint, as well as the unexpected killer whale. The time spent on land is essential to their sustained livelihood, using it for three main purposes: mating, sleeping, and hunting. Polar bears mate between the months of March and July. However, it is not until September that the fertilized egg starts to develop. In this time, the bears create their dens to live in. Surprisingly, they prefer older snow that fell a few years prior to fresh snow. Their species does not hibernate, but they do often rest during periods of bad weather, which can happen often in the Arctic. To keep warm, the bears have black skin to soak up as much of the sun rays as possible, and is cloaked by a thick layer of transparent fur that appears white. As far as hunting goes, the bear's main prey is primarily the seal, as well as other moving creatures equal to or smaller than itself. To secure their prey, polar bears sneak up on the seal and surprise it with a quick lunge. Often the bears will swim underwater, holding their breath for minutes until pouncing onto the ice at the unexpected animal. The seals manage to escape most of the time, but some are not so lucky. Polar bears maintain a distinguished way of life in response to their environment. As the Arctic grows warmer and the ecosystem is disrupted, the polar bears specifically are faced with an uncertain future.
Polar bears are becoming more and more endangered as time passes due to their habitat rapidly shrinking. The decline of polar ice caps is bringing about drastic changes in the Arctic ecosystem. The reason for the melting is global warming. Global warming is the increase of temperatures around the world because of human pollutants and the emission of various greenhouse gases created when fossil fuels are burned. Fossil fuels are burned when using electricity, powering factories or vehicles, and even heating a home or a building. These gases retain the heat from the sunlight, which keeps the earth warm. However, recently the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted into the environment has drastically increased, and therefore more heat is retained in the atmosphere. The world's temperature is rising. The warmer temperatures are reducing the space for polar bears to mate, feed, and rest. As a result, polar bears are forced to swim for longer periods of time to find food and travel much greater distances to get to shore, resulting in occasional drowning.
Although the Arctic ice caps will not necessarily reform as atmospheric temperatures decrease, we can prevent them from melting any further and preserve the habitat of the polar bear. The less electricity used, the less fossil fuels burned, and the less greenhouse gases emitted. To conserve energy, recycling goods is essential. The more goods recycled, the less that have to be produced. The fewer goods we produce and use, the less we depend on the factories that release the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Some alternative and more conservative energy sources are solar energy, wind energy, and hydroelectricity. Solar energy works by capturing sunlight through solar panels and using the sunlight to generate electricity and heat. Wind energy works by using the power of the wind to spin a turbine, which creates energy. Hydroelectricity is based on the same concept, but instead uses the power of a flowing body of water to spin a generator. By resorting to alternative energy sources other than fossil fuels and by conserving produced energy, less greenhouse gases will be emitted into the atmosphere. Over time, the atmospheric temperature of Earth will decrease and the Arctic ice caps will stop melting. Hopefully, the polar bears will inhabit these ice caps again and the ecosystem will be restored. Stopping global warming and restoring the ecosystem of the polar bear is a long process. Let's start it now.